Hi, everyone. Welcome to my Real Estate Investors Hangout. I'm so glad you all could make it tonight. And I want to do a special welcome to those of you who come to our Hangout every week and hang out with us and learn real estate. I also want to do a special shout out to Facebook friends, Twitter followers, YouTube subscribers, and G+ers who join the Hangout and come on and learn some real estate every week. So thank you all for coming tonight. I have a special guest tonight I'll introduce to you in a moment. First, I'll play my little intro video and we'll get the Hangout started. So hold on. All right, welcome everyone to our Thursday night Real Estate Investors Hangout. Tonight I have a special guest. His name is Jay Sherman, and he's very good at joint venture agreements. And that's what I've asked him to share with us tonight. He's going to let us know all the ins and outs and how to do a joint venture agreement so you can incorporate that into your own real estate investing. So I'm going to bring Jay on in a minute here and start the show. So Jay, you ready?
I'm here.
All right, here we go. So I'm going to bring Jay on and introduce him to everyone. Jay Sherman lives in Fallbrook, and I've met Jay at real estate investing clubs. And of course, I always tell you guys to go to clubs and meet people that you can do deals with, partner with, learn from, have fun with. So it's a great place to meet people. Turns out that Jay and I had rehabbed a house one year, and the next year I looked at one of his pictures on Facebook, and he rehabbed a house directly across the street. So Biddeford Road, that's one of our favorite streets over there. So Jay has deals in all parts of the country, and he's going to tell you how he got into real estate and things like that. So I'm going to put Jay on camera and get started. So Jay, you joined us today to discuss how to succeed with joint venture agreements. So I wanted to ask you, what gives you the right to tell us about joint ventures, and why should we listen to you?
Well, first off, thank you very much, Janice, for having me on your webinar this evening. It's a real pleasure to be here with you tonight. One quick thing, just always want to get them out of the way. I just want to do a disclosure and disclaimer. I'm not a tax advisor, attorney, legal professional, financial advisor, or comedian. I'm just a little old real estate investor. So please review all documents with your legal and or professional advisors. Feel free to copy as much down as you'd like. Feel free to call me after the interview. But if you decide to take any act on anything you've learned from my presentation this evening, please review it with your CPA or your attorney or some guy or gal who's got lots of letters after their name. And of course, all figures and charts are estimates and examples only, and no return can be guaranteed. So I just wanted to get that stuff out of the way there.
Excellent, excellent.
I've been investing since the late 90s, and over the last 4 or 5 years, I got turned on to joint venture agreements. I was at a seminar that was hosted by Clyde Wilson and Gary Johnson, and I had this epiphany with Clyde Wilson about joint venture agreements. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've done, I would say, between 50 and 75 deals with people. But for me, that number's never really been that important. It's a nice number to talk about, but for me, it's always been about, am I reaching my financial goals? Am I reaching my goals to be financially free? That's really the big picture and what we're all after. Am I creating enough passive income to cover all my expenses and have a few pennies over at the end of the month, so my outflow is less than my income? Yeah, really the last 4 or 5 years has been my bread and butter with fixing and flipping homes and joint venture agreements with multiple colleagues.
Sorry, right now, Jay, I'm typing into the chat because a few people couldn't see. So Tim just figured out that he could go to my channel on YouTube and watch it live. So if you're having trouble watching it on the webinar jam, any of the attendees, go ahead over to the Wise Wealth University channel on YouTube, and you can see it there. So like 2 or 3 people couldn't see it, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone can get it. They could see the chat, so obviously they were in the room, but they couldn't see the broadcast.
Oh, okay.
So let me see if they answer back on the chat, and then we can keep going. Let's see. Ray and Tim were the 2 that couldn't see it. All right. Sorry. So while I was answering those guys, I lost your train of thought. You gave us your background and who you learned from and what made you kind of jump into real estate. How did you end up in real estate to start with? I guess you had some rentals, so.
Oh, well, I had another career. I had a W-2 job, like most people who jump into real estate. But fortunately, I didn't go cold turkey. I took a long time to transfer between careers. I picked real estate up as a part-time thing back in the late 90s, and I was a editor up in Los Angeles for a number of years, and it just got to that point where I was able to take that financial leap of faith. I had enough money saved up for a good year to start investing in real estate, and took a very calculated risk to go for it and stop working for the man, as they say, and take more control of my life and my destiny.
See the picture. Oh, that is awesome. So tell us a little bit more about those guys that you were training with.
My epiphany with joint venture agreements came from a story that Clyde Wilson was sharing during a seminar entitled Financial Freedom Principles that Gary Johnson and Clyde Wilson host twice a year. They have a 3-day weekend. I believe it's in Atlanta, and then a 3-day weekend in Santa Ana here in California. And I've gone the last 3 out of 5 years. It's
Okay.
one of those seminars that is like a great book that you pick up and you read each year, and maybe you use a highlighter, a different color highlighter each time around, because you pick up new things because you're at a different point in your life. But Clyde was sharing a story with the class about joint venturing, and I couldn't quite grasp it. I didn't understand how he could give up so much of the profit each month to 2 or 3 other partners in this deal. And I went up to him during a break, and I said, I'm having trouble with this. And he said, it's about being able to control his time, being able to do what he will with his time, being able to focus on the next project, and be able to expand your operations better that way than being so consumed and trying to squeeze out every last penny out of a deal. So if you take a little less on each deal, and you have that much more extra time to focus on the next project or more joint venture partners, that was the eye opener for me to allow my network to blossom and really expand deep and wide.
Awesome. That's great. I haven't gone to that seminar, but I've heard really good things about it, and I want to go this year. So, so tell me, what are some challenges to doing real estate without joint ventures? Like if you didn't have joint ventures going for you, what would be your challenge every month doing a deal?
Well, I have a fun slide here I like to show. First off, let's see if this works here. We're going to try sharing the screen.
Okay.
Okay, do you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome.
So success with joint venture agreements. Success. This is what people think it looks like, but the reality is this is what it really looks like. So I've certainly figured out success with joint venture agreements, but it's a lot of back and forth and up and down and left and right, and making mistakes is certainly a part of success. It's just, as long as you make a mistake, make sure it leads to at least 2 steps forward. But some of the challenges of doing real estate without a joint venture agreement, I guess I would answer it with the beauties of doing deals with joint venture agreements is that the amount of detail that needs to go into a joint venture agreement. It gives you a direction when the unexpected or the unknown happens. That's what I think about all the time when I create joint venture deals. How do I protect myself from the unknown? And if we are in the unknown, how you don't want to be a deer in the you don't want to be a deer in the financial headlights, right?
Right, right.
You need to move very quickly when you have a ton of money on the line, and um, and you just you just have to move. You have to move quickly because carrying costs are going to eat up your profits. You know
Mm-hmm.
that is a real grind of the business is the profit is the carrying costs. So um, joint venture agreements are critical. So when uh, when someone um, uh, blacks when someone drops the ball, for example, or someone gets sick or something happens, there's going to be parts of that joint venture agreement that says, okay, well, if I haven't heard from you in 72 hours, or I've tried to get in contact with you for 7 days, there are certain exit points, or there's certain transition points in a joint venture agreement that you want to write into. So
Mm-hmm.
if of course the plan A isn't happening anymore, we need to move quickly to plan B. So I've been in
Okay.
situations where a contractor was injured in a car accident, and he said, "No, I'm fine. I'll be back on the job in 7 days." Well, uh, 7 days came and went, and per the joint venture agreement, I was able to move quickly on the eighth day and take charge. So those are the types of things that may happen, and you have to plan for them as best you can. And I found joint venture agreements are a great way to do that. The other thing I've loved about joint venture agreements is that you don't have employees, you don't have overhead. When the deal is done, that working relationship, as you've come to know it, has terminated is a pretty heavy word, but it's come to a conclusion. The project's
Mm-hmm.
over, and you can go your separate ways, or you can continue to work together. And that's what I've found over the years is repeat business with you people that you have relationships with, people that you feel comfortable with, that you trust, and of course everyone is playing the role and has their competence for their responsibilities. So that's the other big picture answer I've enjoyed about joint venture agreements. At the end of the day, when the market slows down, when we shift into a different quadrant, I can shift gears very quickly. I don't have to worry about an employee's family that he's keeping the lights on and food on the table, so to speak. For the joint venture agreement has a starting point and an ending point, and that for me it's typically from job to job. So
Mm-hmm.
if I have you know 4 or 5 deals going, for me that's going to be consistency. I'm going to have a lot of work going on, and if maybe I've run the course with a partner or two, or things didn't go as planned, and we finished up a job, then I can make that decision at that point in time not to work with that person again, and same with that individual. So that's the beauty of joint venture agreements. I've I've really come to love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, you're starting to go into the next thing I was going to ask you, which is why is it so important for real estate investors to master, the joint venture agreement setup? Why is that? Why is it important for them? Maybe compared to just a regular deal where you hire the contractor and you have, just a regular contract with them, which is not a joint venture, it's just a contract, or they're your employees. So maybe you could contrast those.
Um, the interesting thing about that is the joint venture partner can be the broker, someone who finds the houses. The joint venture partner can be the person who raises the capital. The joint venture partner can be the contractor, or maybe it's maybe one of your partners is the project manager who is managing the day-to-day tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So the uniqueness, that perspective for me is a role playing perspective. You want to bring, you want to identify your strengths in that agreement, and you want to be able to be the yin while someone else is the yang. So if my strength is raising private capital, which it is, in managing people's money, the person I'm looking for is that person who's done the day to day, who enjoys the day to day work. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's their passion, but they don't have any comprehension behind raising private capital. Or maybe it's the contractor who is a great way to go about it, because the contractor is keeping costs low. He knows that he has a financial carrot at the end of that escrow when we eventually
Mm-hmm.
sell it. So there's a bigger financial appetite for everyone involved versus the
Mm-hmm.
contractor that you have to worry about, who is constantly going to have change orders going on with you and nickel and diming, which it happens. It
Right.
will just simply happen after 3 or 4 jobs with a contractor. Everyone gets a little bit cozier. Everyone gets a little bit more relaxed. Things start to cost more. It's just the way it happens. It's just human nature, and that's okay. And at that point in time, it's real simple to just say, hey, this has been good, but I'm just simply going to refrain from doing business for a little while. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
great point, I guess, in not having employees, not having overhead. It makes it real easy to go separate ways and keep an amicable relationship going on,
Mm-hmm.
even though you may not work together for a few months. But then you come back because enough time has been spent apart, where you feel that, okay, maybe this particular project is better for this particular partner or contractor that I was working with. Because I've been in deals with
Right.
contractors who they'll say yes because they want the next deal, but it's simply over their head. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
balancing act of getting a sense of what the contractor is going to bring to the table, what your business partner, who may just be managing the day-to-day operations, is bringing to the table. I may not like to necessarily deal with the day-to-day stuff, but I darn well want to make sure that the person I'm dealing with is competent enough to deal with the day-to-day stuff, because you
Mm-hmm.
have to be you want to obviously want to make sure that you're not being lied to or ripped off. And so that person who you're going to be joint venturing with is going to need to know the ins and outs of being a contractor, or at the very least have been to Home Depot a number of times, and they've gone all over the place, taking down the barcodes, and they have their inventory sheet of what needs to be purchased and what it costs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that joint venture agreement lays out everyone's on the whole team. They kind of lays out what their jobs are, right?
Yeah,
So
what their
everybody
yeah,
knows.
what their strengths are, really. I like to use the word strength,
Uh-huh.
um, because you can have a great project with a fantastic amount of leverage in there. Um, I'm sorry, not leverage, spread or yield.
Mhm.
But if you don't, if you have the process that's working and you have the product that's great, but you don't have the people working well together, you can have a great project collapse on you and end up having
Mhm.
to write a check at the end of escrow.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's definitely about the strengths of each person and the role that they do play.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be writing any checks. You want to be receiving the checks, right? So,
Yes, and I'm not ashamed to say I've been there. I've written those checks, and it's all part of doing business. And I've
right.
certainly learned from those mistakes, and I know I'll never make them again.
All right. So I'm going to go to my next question, which is how would a new real estate investor get started? Maybe can you give us a couple steps of how would they get started in a joint venture if they've never done one before?
Okay. I think you know what? I think I have. Let me share something. Let me do this screen share thing again here.
Okay.
Um, So let's just define what the joint venture agreement is. A venture, it's a contractual agreement joining together two or more parties for the purpose of executing a particular business undertaking. And I love to put this slide up because people say JV a lot, or they'll say joint venture, and people are not clear about what exactly it is. When I heard JV agreements in the early years, I didn't quite know what it was, and
Mm-hmm.
and you're kind of you're kind of nervous to raise your hand because everyone else is nodding their head in acknowledgement, but the truth really was in those one-on-one classes that the majority of the folks didn't quite weren't quite familiar with the subject matter, and that's why we were all there uh, to uh, to learn. Um, as far as getting started, I love this diagram here. This I borrowed this from Pete Fortunato, and I had actually asked him about using this, and I said that I wanted to swap out a bunch of the sections of the house. Um, for him, this would read the foundation of each house is security. And so I just changed it and I talked about each section of the joint venture agreement. And so what I would say
Okay.
to folks who are getting new real estate investors who are getting into um, real estate and wanting to joint ventures is simply Google joint venture agreement and find a very basic outline. Um, and get familiar with the basic sections of the joint venture agreement. A lot of them are there to protect you. A lot of them have to do with litigation. Um, um, but the ones I put here are the fun ones, right? The division of profits. You want to be familiar with the division of profits. The contributions. Who's doing what? That's what we were talking about earlier. Am I bringing the money to the table?
Mm-hmm.
Is Janice the contractor, or is she manage? Are you managing the contractor each day? And then the scope of work. You want to be very clear about how you're going to get from A to Z.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge
Yeah.
process, depending upon how large that project is. I've worked on the $30,000 budget, and I've worked on the $250,000 budget, and they're really night and day. So becoming familiar with the scope and description section is critical, and you need to be as thorough as possible, depending upon, or not depending upon, but I should say when you conclude the scope and description really should be finalized before you put a hammer to the nail. On the smaller projects, you can get going and have a pretty comfortable sense of what needs to be done. But on these larger projects, I think it's critical to hammer that out. Make sure everyone is on the same page, because again, when you have so much money on the line, you don't want to be a deer in the financial headlights there.
Mm-hmm.
The penalty section, if someone doesn't perform, I gave the example earlier about someone getting sick, right, or in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
uh, what if the agreement had to do with a longer period of time? You might want to put in a penalty clause, because my time is being wasted. My time has value. So if I was just bringing money to the table and nothing's getting done, we have carrying costs that are hitting us each day. We have utilities. We have a whole bunch of things, and so the other thing I learned about the penalty section is that you might get involved with someone that it feels very good up front, and it always feels very good up front because you're talking about how much money you're going to make. But the most important thing is that 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 you're transparent. You might get into a business deal with someone who doesn't have anything else going on at the time, and that's the question you ask up front. But maybe 3 months into your project, they've got other things going on, and they're moving their crews around, and things start slowing down. And so if you have a timeline that say it's going to be done in 6 months, that's when you might want to have a penalty clause put in, or like a per diem. Per diem is something that most folks will be familiar when you're when escrow takes longer than agreed upon. So the penalty
Mm-hmm.
section is really important. The termination, that goes back to um, if your joint venture or yourself doesn't perform well, you need to have a termination clause. It just simply has to be agreed upon. If X amount of days goes by and nothing happens, then we need to switch to plan B. That means that you're no longer going to be a part of the project, and I'm going to take over. Records and accounting, that's the most critical part of all of this. Everyone wants to make sure that they're going to get their fair share of the deal, and so records and accounting is critical. Every project I work on always has errors somewhere. Data
Mm-hmm.
entry is just human error. It just has human error. I call it the fat finger uh, uh, uh,
Right.
syndrome, right? You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can hit a one, you can mean to hit a four, but you actually hit a one, or you mean to hit a nine, but you hit a six, and so balancing the books is critical. Um, I just wanted to give a picture here. This is typically what my joint venture agreement looks like. It's typically 5 pages. So for anyone new getting started, this is what you could expect, about 5 pages. And this is between two people. If we were going to have three people involved, for example, a broker who finds the houses, myself who raises the money and brings that to the table for the purchase and budget, and then say a contractor who is dealing with all the day-to-day stuff, well, there's going to be more information at it because you've got three parties going on
Mhm, mhm,
now. As far as writing these, the best advice I've ever received was from an attorney, and he said to create the most important parts of your joint venture agreement at a fourth grade level. You know, give examples, spell it out, make it as clear as day when you have a lot of money on the line. So a lot of my joint venture agreements will have the same sentence or same message or same concern mentioned two or three times, but in different ways throughout the joint venture agreement, just so that there's absolutely no miscommunication. What I also do, and
mhm,
what I recommend to people get involved with joint venture agreements is and this this is something that is obviously it's a bilateral agreement, right? You're not making this decision on your own, but I go into the agreements with my property on title. That's the way I like to approach it. I like to have ultimately the control of all the money. If something goes wrong, I don't like having too many cooks in the kitchen. And
mhm,
what we do with the joint venture agreement is on the side. You have the grant deed, you have the vesting of the property is filed in public records, and my company's entity would be on title. And then on the side here, we have the joint venture agreement that has been signed and sometimes dated, and you can get it notarized if you want. That's my first preference. It just makes it easy when it comes to closing escrow at the end of a long project. The other way is the whole title. You could do 50-50. You could be co-trustees on a trust if your property was held in trust. But those become a little bit more advanced, and you just want to make sure that the person you're dealing with is on the same page with you. So if I'm bringing the capital to the deal, I I, I set the tone with the expectations of my company being on title, and just being able to make it a clean escrow, because when you do have multiple entities going on title, things can get a little bit complicated sometimes.
true, true. So would company
Contribution.
B be a company owned by, one of the other parties? Is you referred to company B?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, so for the contribution section, this is the part where I spell out all of what I'm doing, all of what I'm bringing to the table. And what I'll do in the contribution section is I'll list what the money is being used for, if it's just for the purchase. Maybe the other party might be bringing in the repair costs, but most of the time I'll bring in the purchase money and the repair costs. So you
Mhm,
want to spell all that out in your contribution section. Um, and this is really, really wordy. I'm just going to go through this real quickly. But and I just like to show people all the details that do go into these agreements. Um, in this section, as far as contributions, I'm talking about bringing money to the table, and then it continues with Company B about what they're going to do. Right? They're selecting the materials, and they're dealing with the licensed contractor. Maybe they are a licensed contractor. All that type of stuff is spelled out in the contribution section. And then the termination section I spoke about. Should Company B fail to fulfill its responsibilities as called forward in this agreement within 30 calendar days from the close of escrow, then Company A has the right to take over responsibilities. Um, those are things that are just kind of the unknown, and you need to take into consideration things that may go wrong, because on large projects with so many moving parts, whether it's materials
Hmm.
showing up late, wrong materials showing up, people not showing up for work. Your contractor or your project manager has to have control of all of this, and you uh, very well want to have a timeline set forth if things aren't moving forward as productive as they should. The division of profit section, this is the fun section. Are you splitting it 50-50? Is it a 60-40 split? Maybe I brought the house and the money, the purchase money and the budget, and so maybe it's a 70-30 split. The percentage split will also play out with the experience of the partners.
Hmm.
Maybe I'm trying to help someone get started. So
Hmm.
maybe there's going to be a bit more hand holding than I'm used to, which is fine. I'm happy to dive into these projects when it's necessary. But maybe the percentage split might be a 70-30. So these are things that you want to think about if you're getting into partnerships for the first time. It's just like promissory notes. Anything that's put into a promissory note is acceptable as long as both parties agree. That's kind of what it comes down to. The joint venture agreements, you want to make
Right.
everything bilateral. Here I go further into net profits. Here I go into examples of. This is an example of someone who brought me a house, and they said the ARV, or the retail value, was going to be X amount of dollars, and so I held them to that. I made them put their money where their mouth was, because they were more familiar with the area than I was. So that's just some more details about spelling out, the net profits and how it works. Here, I
Hmm.
also create what I call a financial safety net. Maybe the project takes way too long, and maybe the carrying costs eat up most of the profit. What I'll throw in is like a minimum percentage on the amount of money that has been borrowed to protect my financial interests. I did everything I was supposed to do as the money partner, but my project manager or my contractor, unfortunately, didn't follow through on his part of the joint venture agreement. So I might put things in like this, because this will ensure me that they are moving as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And if your partner all of a sudden is involved in 5 other projects that he was not involved with in the beginning,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
then this is a great clause to have in, because all of a sudden your profit is dwindling because he's making profits on other deals that you're not a part of. So this just goes on. I go through examples and get very, very detailed. So I guess the the uh, the moral of doing these is making it as detailed as possible to protect yourself when the unknown pops up again, because you just don't want to be that a deer in the financial headlights of a big project.
Hmm. Hmm. So we have a few people online that have done wholesale deals, or they're just getting started. So if someone was going to get started in doing a flip, from what you've told us, I'm going to go through and just outline a few steps. So first they would find the people that were involved in the deal, but in terms of writing the joint venture agreement, they'd be writing this in fourth grade English, basically spelled out so everyone understands it. And then step three would be to get all the parties to agree, put in their input, and then sign the agreement. Did I
Yeah.
did I miss any steps, or what would
Well,
they do?
you are signing a legal binding agreement, so you probably want to have an attorney review all of this.
Okay.
I'm not uh, advertising for Legal Shield, or pushing them in any way, shape, or form. Don't call me to ask how to sign up. I don't gain anything from this except to share with people who are just getting started. I've been a member of Legal Shield for 10 or 11 years now, and it's been the best investment of time and money, peace of mind, confidence. So when I
Hmm.
deal with my joint venture agreements and I've written something out, every single time I have an attorney review what I've created, because they're going to
Perfect.
look at it from the strictly from the legal perspective, right?
Mhm.
And so it's always, and if nothing else, to have a fresh set of eyes on something you've worked so hard to put together. So I definitely always recommend having an attorney review what you've done. So then when you go to your business partner, you can go into that meeting with confidence that you've spoken to an attorney on behalf of his interest and your interest. And this is button up as best as possible. And of course, you always want to make sure that your business partner has taken the time to have their legal advisors review everything, and that
Mhm.
is listed in the joint venture agreement, that each party has had that opportunity to do so.
Okay. Okay. So that's good. So they find the people involved in the deal and they write it in. I love the fact that an attorney told you write it in simple English,
Hmm.
and then when you're done, have them review it. And that way they're not putting in all their kind of legal language and they're not taking some boilerplate form, off the internet, off the attorney internet, and
Hmm.
using that. It's really in something that you and your partners understand the way
Yeah.
you've written it out. So I love
Right.
that. Yeah.
Right, because at the end of the deal, you want to read through it, and you both need to understand, you know, how you're supposed to conclude that project together. You don't want to have to say, "Boy, I haven't read this in a while, and I can't remember what that word means," and have to have an
Right.
attorney review something again.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. So, are there any other steps that someone would do to execute the joint venture?
Um, I think the other step is that you both want to have a copy. So you might both want to have a wet signature copy where you both sign it right there together. You bring two copies to your
Mhm.
luncheon or your meeting or whatever. So you
Mhm.
each have a copy. Some people like to use DocuSign. I don't mind using DocuSign for escrows and things like that. But something like a joint venture agreement, um, um, I like to have wet signatures on.
Okay. Okay. So if some of our listeners and viewers got started today and used joint ventures in their real estate investing, what would their life look like maybe 90 days from now? Maybe 90 days from now they wouldn't have completed a project, but say a year from now or 5 years from now, how would this improve their real estate investing?
Well, obviously, it's going to be about that person's determination, persistency, and consistency. I would guess in the first few a month or two, the first 90 days, they very well may be in a period of paralysis by analysis. I was certainly there when I first got started, and that's a very real reality. And that's okay. So if you're going through that, that's okay. Just get out of it. Um, I think I think the most critical thing behind exploring the unknown, like a joint venture agreement, is persistency and consistency. Malcolm Gladwell wrote. Um, what was that? Oh, Outliers. And
I love that
he
book.
talked
Yeah.
about success and putting in your 10,000 hours. He referred to the 10,000 hours. He used
Yeah.
examples of the Beatles, how they worked 8 days a week before they ever came to America, working
Right. In a German club, a German
right
nightclub
12,
or something.
12 hours 12 hours a day, kind of a thing. And so obviously, um, you don't want to be consistent and persistent in a square room walking into a corner, right? You're going to be consistent and persistent, but that's getting you nowhere. Obviously, you need to keep fine tuning in that direction. So
Right.
I think I I think after two or three deals, everything becomes that much clearer. I remember getting started, and after about three deals, maybe four deals, things just set in. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you're consistent with your marketing, if you're consistent with your advertising, if you're consistent with networking, that is probably the most important part of all that we do, no matter what industry you're in. I read a book called uh, networking is a contact sport, and there's a great line in that book. It says, 50% of what I do is a waste of time. I just don't know which 50% it is. And so it's a great line. I love it. And
Yeah.
it just means be consistent and persistent, stay the course. And if you master the joint venture agreement, it really becomes about what, not so much what to do, but what not to do. And that is more advice I've gotten out of attorneys over the years. You don't want to go head first into something. You really want to stand back and think about what do we not want to be doing so things do run smoothly. And once you figure out the the relationship part of it, the honest, the trust part of it, and the competency part of it. When you have those three parts moving together, then you're really lined up for good success.
Okay, so what specific roadblocks would investors encounter when they were trying to do these joint venture agreements? And I just want to tell everyone, Jay's mentioning different books that he's read. I've set up a page on my website specifically for Jay. So it's wisewealthuniversity.com, just like the title down here, over there, right there. Yeah, there we go. wisewealthuniversity.com/Jay Sherman, JAYSHERMAN. And so if you can go there after the show, probably by tomorrow, I'll have a list of the books that he recommends that helped him get started. I think it's books and courses and audios and things like that. So I'll have that list up on there for you as well. So back to Jay, what specific roadblocks would people come up with when they first started? If you could, take your mind back, like what happened in your mind that blocked you sometimes from getting started with these joint ventures?
I think not being transparent with people, that's probably the most critical part of all this, especially when things go wrong. Have found I've earned that much more respect when I stepped up immediately. I didn't send an email. I picked up the phone and I called someone. The phone is still the best way to communicate. Sometimes people may not look at their email for a whole, 8 hours,
Yeah.
but you can pick up that phone pretty quickly. So I think transparency, looking back, would probably be the most critical thing to avoid the roadblocks. As far as the actual roadblocks, hanging out with the wrong crowd.
Your parents told you that in high school, right?
Well, and I'm not just talking about doing drugs or drinking beer or something.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the naysayers, and I think so many people deal with that. You might be dating the wrong person. You might be with people in your life who you grew up with, but they haven't grown up, and you're trying to make that transition into a career. I think that was probably the most difficult part of my life, was letting go of very long friendships that they weren't doing much for me anymore. As much as you wanted to hang out with people, I needed to be in a like-minded environment. I created a mastermind group about 5 years ago to create that environment that would give me that. I called it my shot of adrenaline, real estate adrenaline each month. So it's really about the like-minded environment. If you're hanging out with the wrong crowd, again, I'm not talking about the heavy drugs or things like that. I'm just talking about the basic psychologies of life. The people who are going to always be the W-2 person, which is okay, but that's security to me. I like being the entrepreneur. I like taking calculated risks. That's the like-minded environment you need to hang out with. You need to hang out with people who take you to that next level. And so the roadblocks can easily be the relationship you're in. If you're motivated after a meeting, or you've read a great book and you're not quite getting that response from that significant person in your life, or maybe your brother, or who knows what it is. I think the like-minded environment is critical, because it is challenging to succeed. It takes so much effort. You need to have all you need to have that consistent flow of positive feedback, consistency and persistency in like-minded environments like clubs, going to seminars. That for me, that was, I think, the biggest hurdle I was able to overcome in my network was when I started going from clubs to seminars. Because when you got to the seminar level, you realized that, hey, I know that person from the club level, and they're here away from their family or their children or whatever, and they're putting
For the whole weekend. Yeah.
right, they're putting their time in just like me. And so that made a huge difference in my career
Mm-hmm.
in networking. And so that was a roadblock. That was a direction I went in order to avoid the roadblocks. The group I was hanging out with, these old friends who just were kind of settling into where they wanted to be in life, but I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to take it up here. And so the like-minded environment is so very critical.
Yeah. So I guess you'd say that, take going to the full day seminars brought you in with a different group of people, or you got to see people who were really committed to have to take that amount of time away on a weekend. It wasn't just, an hour and a half at a club during the week. So I
Yeah,
think,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
And that's really where the bonding took place. That's where the relationships started growing, because I would talk to people, you'd see them at seminars, and then you'd see them another month later, and if you hit it off at the previous one, boy, it was great to see them 4 weeks later. and
Mm-hmm.
and and when that synergy takes over, that's a great place to be, where you're just busting at the seams to go out and get that next deal, but most importantly, be working with the right folks. And the seminar level, listening to the right educators, was really where I was able to just take leaps over any roadblocks that I had at that time, because I just threw myself into these like-minded environments, and it just stayed with me. The motivation and determination just stayed with me.
And I think that's a great tip. And they say that, and thanks for bringing that up for us. They say that your net worth is the average of the net worth of the five people you spend the most time with. So look around and see who you're spending that time with. And it looks like Jay looked around and changed those people, over time as he met people that were successful in real estate. Would you say
Yeah,
that's your
that
strategy?
yes, that's a great way to put it. That immediate circle of yours. Definitely look around and see what your influence is, because what's going into your pocket that may only be so limited by that environment. What's going into your mind. What's
Mm-hmm.
going to your education.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's so true, because it's really what the other people read and what they talk about, and that's the environment that you're in. So if you put yourself in the right environment, they're going to be reading and talking about subject matter that's really going to be beneficial for you. So you
Mhm.
shared some great strategies. Are there any other strategies that you might want to share with the audience that I might have missed?
Well, I mean, joint venturing is just one thing I do. I also loan money. I invest in non-performing notes. I have a real estate portfolio of investment properties. So the point is, be diverse. Be diverse in what you're doing. Have
Okay.
diversity.
Have diversity.
Just like investing in the stock market. You want to have conservative, moderate, and aggressive, balanced portfolio. So that's the way I look at real estate. Have
Right.
diversity in what you do. Don't put all your eggs in one real estate basket. I love real estate. Real estate's great because it's tangible. I can go out and touch any one of my houses any given day of the week. I'm
Right.
not relying on a financial advisor who has my money, in mutual funds splashed
Right.
around the world. So I think diversity is probably the best advice I can recommend in what you do.
Okay. Do you have any of your properties that are, have you done joint ventures, not just on flips, but say on long-term holds, or is it really specifically for the flips that it's most important?
No, yes, I do. It's that would be considered an equity split partnership. So yeah, I do have a few of those,
Okay.
and those are great too. Though you can get into um, I could elaborate just a little bit on those. I treat some of those like um, um, like, say for example, if you go into an investment for long term with someone, and that is initial that's a catalyst, that's a train of thought that you go into it. This is for the future.
Right.
I'm going to look to retire on this money. But say if the person decides to, after 5 years, back out, or they had some health bills come up and they want to sell off the half of their property, I I use the strategy of early withdrawal penalties, like from, say, a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA. If you withdraw it early, you get hit
Mm-hmm.
with penalties. So
Mm-hmm.
I look at it as those equity share partnerships. I look at those as part of my retirement basket.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get involved with those types of joint venture agreements, you want to be able to think long term. And so that's another, going back to the penalties section, right? Maybe it's an
Mm-hmm.
agreement
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to hold this for at least 10 years, but maybe your partner after 5 years says, hey, you know what, I tried my best, this was my intention from the beginning, but you know uh, my wife had cancer, or whatever the
Right.
situation may
Right.
be, and they need to sell. Hopefully, it wouldn't be that bad. Maybe they just decided to spend the money now and go on vacation. But now it's disrupting your long-term goals, so there should be a
Right.
penalty clause involved in something like that. A long When you get into long-term strategies.
Right. Oh, so yeah, I like that because then it can really spell out everything you need to do for a long term. Because a lot of people don't like to partner on long term deals for that very reason, because they don't know what's going to happen with the other person. And it's kind of an alternative to sort of setting up an LLC for everything, which in California, as you know, can be expensive. So
And the other thing too about long-term investments, just to kind of conclude the answer, is um, you may have unknown partners. Say if a partner passes away, your new partner is now that person's spouse. I've
right,
heard those horror stories. So
yeah,
those are things you need to think about when you plan out long term. If someone is disabled or is unable to perform, then you have, then the first right of refusal might be that you have the right to buy out their share, something like that. Because
hmm,
the last thing you want to do is be in bed with four other partners who might be
their
this
kids or
partner's
something.
kids. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So those
yeah,
are long term things to think about before you get involved with long term business relationships.
right, right. Yeah, I agree with that. One of the good friends of mine who was an investor and also an attorney would always say to me, well, I want to know what's going to happen if I get hit by a bus or
Hmm.
if you get hit by a bus, because those are unexpected things. And like you said, then you have a bunch of other partners who are their heirs, and you don't really know how they're going to react to real estate. In most circumstances, because real estate's a tough investment, the other people in the family really don't get it or don't want it. So you end up with people who, just can't partner with you on it. They just want to know that this whole problem is going to go away. So that's something great to do, is have the joint venture.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
that was
I'm
well
gonna
said.
ask Jay one more question, and so I'm gonna go over to the chat. If you guys have questions, while I ask Jay the last question, why don't you guys type in something that you want an answer from Jay, and I'll continue on. But that way, I'll give you guys a chance to get your questions posted. So, Jay, if someone was going to start today or tomorrow, what would be sort of a concrete step that they could do to really jumpstart them in this joint venture project?
Okay, well, I'm going to assume that they're already interested in real estate, that they're already going to clubs and things like that. So I would say you want to yell loudly and proudly and let people know what you're doing. So you can attract that attention by creating flyers and putting those out at real estate
Mm-hmm.
tables.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the clubs have a haves and wants section. Public speaking, we all deal with the fear. I remember a couple of years ago when I was on a panel and I realized, wow, my heart's not racing this time around. And I finally had
Ooh.
that calm with getting up in front of people. Public speaking is a wonderful way to let people know who you are. You have that opportunity of 1 to 10 ratio or 1 to 100 ratio, whatever the number is, it's greater than you, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
great opportunity to let people know who you are and what your intentions are and what your agenda is. So create flyers, uh, take every opportunity to do public speaking. Um, I would say capitalize on networking by going out to lunch with people, getting to
Mhm.
know people. You
Mhm.
know, it's a relationship game. So I think those are
Mhm.
good starting points.
Right.
And if you're not necessarily involved, or you're not ready to go there yet, friends and family. Friends and family is kind of really the ultimate catalyst. You know, those are the people you can start talking with about your
Mhm.
ideas. And again, hopefully you're hanging out with the right five that you
Mhm.
spoke about earlier.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think that's true that if you go to lunch with someone, you're going to spend an hour with someone. Maybe you only talk to them a few minutes at a real estate club, but spend a lunch or two with them to find out if they would work into a good partner. And I always tell people, it's in my private lending book, when you're starting out, practice on the friends and family that are not going to work with you, because they're not going to be able to, but you get to practice and get more comfortable with that language
Absolutely.
by talking to people who aren't going to lend. And you might get lucky, because people who don't have money always know people who do, and they're quite aware of who has money that they might want to lend. So they might be a connection step for you, your second degree of freedom, over to someone who would want to be a lender, or a partner in a joint venture. So that's a very good tip there. Um, it looks like we do have the first question came in, and I think we covered it earlier, but it's good to nail it down. Do we need legal representation and forms to make a joint venture? And that question comes from Richard.
Hey, Richard. Yeah, well, I mean, once you sign that joint venture agreement, it becomes a legal binding agreement. So that the document is a legal binding agreement. You don't need to seek out legal advice, but I highly recommend it. I continue to do it every time once I complete a joint venture agreement. Every joint venture agreement is different. Each partner brings to the table different expectations, and so every joint venture agreement wording is going to be different. So once we finalize it and we feel comfortable together, I always have an attorney review it. If for nothing else, just having a fresh set of eyes look over it. So absolutely.
Yeah, and it could be that question came in if someone didn't hear the beginning of it, because like I said, you're writing it out in simple language and having legal advice um, review it. I think that I had the same reaction you did when I first heard about joint ventures in these clubs. Was, wow, that's some mysterious joint venture form that I don't know about, and everyone who's nodding their head must know about it, and you're kind of in the dark for a while till you realize that you can write one yourself. And I tell people the same thing about putting a property in a land trust. It's a couple page document that you write in Word on your own computer, and it's a trust, and that's what it is. It's not some complicated, it's not a mortgage, or anything like that comes from a bank. So it's a basic, it says it in the title, it's a joint venture agreement. And you can make an agreement. And that's why I did that picture when I was advertising the webinar of four kids on a dock jumping into the water together. They agreed to jump in at the same time, and then they went. So it's an agreement.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Jay, do you have any other things you wanted to share that maybe I might have missed by not asking you, or did you have any other things you think it would help people to know?
Um, a, a bit of advice I received from Pete Fortunato a few years ago. And if you don't know Pete Fortunato, he is one of the most out of the box thinkers, creative financial investors I've ever come across. And he talked about doing deals with people. He talked about relationships. Um, he talked about trust, and he also talked about not going to court. You know, when things go wrong, and you are going to end up spending all this time to make a point simply on principle, or maybe they owe you some money.
Hmm.
Think long and hard about going down that path. I've been close to that, and I've pulled away. Because you take into consideration all that energy you're putting into something like that, and I think the energy could be better used finding the next deal, or licking
Hmm.
your wounds and tightening up that next joint venture agreement. I
Hmm.
think I would agree that going to court based upon something like a joint venture agreement is just, it would just be soul killing, as he expresses. I mean, there is a part in the joint venture
Hmm.
agreement that calls for mediation, where you can go and talk it out and
Hmm.
see where that goes. Or is that arbitration? I forget. I get them backwards. But one is talk it out, and then the other one is, okay, we're going to have a final decision. So that's in the joint venture agreement, and that's needed in case you don't see eye to eye. But I would have to say, avoid things like the system. Don't don't get
Right.
caught up in the system, because I would think kind of like a bad tenant.
Yeah,
Take your
just move
time.
on.
Right. Take your time. If you're an investor and you have passive income, you have rental properties. Uh, you have to take your time finding a good tenant, because a bad tenant is going to cost you far more than one missed mortgage.
Right.
So it's kind of that perspective, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. The legal things always cost way more than you expect, and it's takes up a lot of time as well. So we do have another question coming in from Tim, and that is, how do you overcome people not liking that you're the only one on title? Meaning, how can they protect their interest? Is the JV, and a second part of that is the JV agreement attached to the property after closing, or if it's all outside of escrow?
Great question. That is just that's just my perspective, how I approach the deal. So if I say I want this, and person B says that's okay, or doesn't say anything, then that's fine. I've set my objective. I've set my expectations. But
Mhm.
if my partner says, well, no, I'm not comfortable with that, I'd like to be on title, then that's fine too. The joint venture agreement is a bilateral agreement. It's not a
Mhm.
unilateral agreement. I was just sharing earlier what I prefer. I
Right.
think less cooks in the kitchen on title is better. You have a joint venture agreement, and to the second part of your question, you have a joint venture agreement that's on the side. The joint
Mhm.
venture agreement is not filed anywhere. It's not a part of the deed, or title, or,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
anything associated with the property, other than your written word. Your
Mhm.
John Hancock, and that is um, I mean, and that would hold up in court. It's just not something you put into public record. So that's how
Yeah.
you would protect your financial interest. But you have every right. If you're going to be the contractor or the project manager, and your money guy comes in and says, "Oh, I would just like my company to be on title," don't shy away from your expectations. You have every right to say, well, I'd like us to be co-trustees on a trust instead,
Mhm.
or I'd like to have each company have 50% undivided interest. So there are different ways to approach it. Just make sure that your expectations are met.
Right, right. And I like that workaround is you can have a trust on the property and each company be a beneficiary, of the trust. And it's a way to do that without, number one, having establishing a whole separate entity for it. And number two, you don't have to have, you know, too long company names going through escrow and getting them all confused and things like that. So it's a good
The the other
workaround.
the other suggestion I would make is, if you do business with one particular person a lot, then you can create a limited partnership. So you can have both of your entities,
Mhm.
if they're both LLCs or one's an S corp, whatever. You can put the partnership entity on title and hold title to the property that way. So that's another option. But if you go that route, that's time and money spent with a CPA, getting it set up.
Right.
You're going to have more annual costs to have a limited partnership, but it's another way to go, which I have done. I just start out one way. You kind of keep your financial cards here, or your expectations here, and then you kind of lay everything out when you get to the point
Mhm.
of what I want and what you want. But at the end of the day, you want it to be win-win. If you can't start out well together, how do you think you're going to be halfway through and at the end? So
Right.
it's critical to start out win-win and end up win-win.
Right. And I think when you're dealing with people that you are familiar with and you've worked with, I know with most investors that I've worked with, we just decide, okay, you've got an LLC, let's put it in your LLC's name, because the entity owning the property didn't have that much weight for us, because everyone who put money in had notes. So they all had notes, recorded against the property so that their money was protected. And most people say, well, that's good, because if your company's dealing with it, if there's any liability issues, then you're the one who has to handle it, and I don't really have to. So I think people have different perspectives about whether they want their company on there or not. Some people would rather not have their company on there.
I
So it
totally agree.
kind of
I'm a
works
big
to your advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of trusts. I tell people I don't own any real estate, but I'm a beneficiary of some trusts that own real estate, right?
Right.
So I'm a big fan of anonymity. Um, um, and then again, it's also perspective. One of my favorite educators will tell you that he feels that the that the person bringing the capital to the table should
Mhm.
have the tax benefit of being the one on title. So it's all
Right.
perspective and meeting expectations and just starting win-win and any win-win. So
I agree.
if you don't mind, I just want to
Go
give my real estate club a little plug. I'm on board with NSDREI. In November, we have Dykes. I'm sorry, October. We have Dykes Bodiford coming to speak at our club, and he's a huge trust guy, entity guy. So if you want to
Mhm.
know more about holding title with entities and trusts, he's a great guy to come listen to.
Okay, okay. And give your location there for the club.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we meet at the El Camino Real in Oceanside on the third Tuesday of every month. The website is nsdrei.org. It stands for North San Diego Real Estate Investors.
Okay, okay. And so Oceanside is in the north part of San Diego County for people that are, in Orange County or wherever they're
Mhm.
listening from. So they could come do that. And sometimes when someone like Dykes comes and speaks, doesn't he then do like a Saturday seminar after the evening one?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. I believe it's the following weekend or maybe 2 weekends later, but he'll be having a seminar in the Orange County area somewhere in Santa
Okay.
Ana, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think if you go to the site, the website for the club, you would see if he's going to do a seminar. They usually post it, especially if he's going to be the speaker just before then.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Good. So we have another question coming in. This is from Tim. Have you used, and I think you touched on it, but let's go into this one a little bit deeper. Have you used long-term JV agreements as well for holding an apartment building or another type of property?
Any of my long-term equity split joint venture agreements are strictly in single-family homes. So
Okay.
it doesn't mean I wouldn't do something larger or different asset class or something. I
Mm-hmm.
just haven't had that opportunity. But
Mm-hmm.
if it made sense and that was presented to me, I certainly would certainly consider it.
Yeah, I would say that would be good for some of the smaller deals. But if you're going to do something long term on a larger deal, what I've done is create an entity that just holds that property.
Yeah,
So
so
no
that's
matter
called a
what my
partnership.
corporation is, especially if it involves another person, then you would create a corporation or an LLC just holding that property. So all rents and all the accounting goes through that separate LLC. And that way the LLC agreement spells out everyone's involvement.
Right.
So,
And if you didn't want to go that direction and you wanted to keep your LLC separate because maybe your LLC holds, title and other parts of your portfolio, what you could do is what I mentioned earlier is you create a limited partnership. So you have your
right.
LLC as a partner and your other your colleagues LLC as a partner, but title is held in the partnership entity for purposes of what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I think that finishes up the questions. And so, unless someone has a quick one they need to type in, I want to thank Jay for giving us all this knowledge about joint venture agreements and how to succeed with joint venture agreements. And I think, Jay, that you've been able to demystify the whole idea of joint venture agreements and how they're used in real estate. And I know that you spent hours and hours and of your weekends going to seminars so that you really had a good grasp of how joint ventures were used. And I really appreciate you kind of putting that all together and distilling it down for us tonight so that we'd know exactly how to proceed if we want to do a joint venture. So I really appreciate that. Do you have any final word before we close?
Well, I think 2015 is still going to be a great year to be in real estate, but do your homework and go to the right seminars and be prepared for 2016 because it could be a whole new ball game.
You know, you're right. Each year brings on something new. We don't know what's going to happen to interest rates and unemployment and an election year. So there's a lot that's going to happen this year. So that concludes our seminar on joint venture agreements. I'm going to close out, and I've got to do one more thing here, put this up. And so if you want to follow us on Twitter, I'm the Pink Professor on Twitter. And if you want to find out where to register for other Hangouts, and is this, I think it's showing up okay, not backwards, but you can go to wisewealthuniversity.com/Hangouts, and you can register there, and you'll get a notice about our seminars and how we have them every Thursday night at 6 p.m. So I'll go back to this, and let me play my video out, and I hope to see you all in 2 weeks. Next week, I'll be on vacation in Northern California, hiking on the beach. And so in 2 weeks, we will have another Hangout. Let me go back to, there's so many controls to keep going here. All right, so thank you all. Thank you for coming from Twitter, Facebook, G+, and my YouTube channel. And I want to thank Jay for giving us his time tonight. Thank you so much, Jay.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you all have a great night, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.